It's the Dark Reading News Desk. I'm Terry Sweeney, contributing editor to Dark Reading, and I'm joined today by Marc Punzirudu, Vice President of Security Consulting Services at ControlScan. Marc, thanks so much for joining us at the News Desk today.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Marc, ControlScan is best known for its unified security and compliance products, but its charter has recently expanded. Tell us a bit about that and how the company has moved into the managed services realm.
So about 10 years ago, ControlScan was largely a payment card compliance organization where we supported small, medium businesses with their payment card compliance needs, so PCI DSS. Okay. We then moved into things like HIPAA to support healthcare organizations with their compliance requirements as well. And through all that interaction with partners, we quickly realized that compliance was the bar. And that doesn't properly protect our partners or do anybody any kind of justice. So we rapidly expanded and made a plan to support them with managed security services, which not only align to those standards, but we're also part of a holistic information security program.
All right. And you guys have recently commissioned some original research. I think part of that was it was about a third of organizations have IT staff that can perform ad hoc monitoring on an as-needed basis. That's a pretty startlingly low number. What do you make of that?
I think a lot of organizations do things because of a compliance mandate or because they've seen on the news that these things are important. And often they're spending money on solutions and implementing things without getting the most bang for their buck. So the ad hoc monitoring, ad hoc alerting without having any formal processes, it's really indicative of the checkbox of compliance industry.
It seems like so many companies fall prey to that they design for compliance and not so much for real hardcore security.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that an organization, if they're authentically secure, can map the compliance requirements to that, and that's the best way to approach your business and spend your time and energy.
Unfortunately, as we've seen, that's not typically the way it goes.
No, people are often striving to do the least amount possible to obtain a goal.
So ensuring compliance, as we know, can be quite a minefield. I'm sure you've got some great stories there.
Yeah, so we have, I'll give you one example in a generic sense of a very interesting story that we worked with. So we work with a lot of small to mid-sized businesses and startups as they have to undergo their first compliance journey. You could imagine there are some colorful interpretations and interesting scenarios that pop up from time to time. We worked with one organization not long ago where the CISO actually went through all the effort to stand up a isolated cloud environment that they used for nothing just to demonstrate compliance. We're probably spending, I would imagine with the compliance assessment, the consulting that went along with it, and then the infrastructure costs, they were probably spending better part of $100,000 a year just in an effort to check the box so that they didn't have to do it for the rest of their organization. So it was all a smoke show. And as you can imagine, that's not a very effective use of money or, I would say, being a good partner to your consumers.
Sure. You were just talking about this idea of operationalizing security and compliance. Help us understand a little bit better about what that means and what's in it for security professionals.
Well, I think we all have to understand that compliance isn't going away. It's always going to be there. It's not a thing that's going to change over time. So compliance being the minimum security best practices to do something in some industry is the best way that I can define it. If you do a great job at security and you plan correctly and map all those requirements back into that frame of thought, you'll secure your organization and meet compliance requirements at the same time. And with the numerous standards that are out there, the variable acronym soup that floats around, it's impossible to manage, and they change all the time. So ensuring that you have a proper cybersecurity framework that aligns to all those standards and best practices is really your only bet to do it to any degree of satisfaction.
Sure. So as you gaze into your crystal ball there, like what do you see in the future with organizational security and the attending compliance requirements?
Well, I think it's going to be important for every business to, one, sit down with their executives and make sure that there's actual executive buy-in to performing the tasks that are required to secure the organization. And that's the goal of all these compliance frameworks and new pieces of legislation, from CCPA and GDPR to HIPAA to PCI compliance. It's really to bring the conversation forward and set minimum expectations. But once the tone from the top changes and there's some ownership and involvement there, the culture will change, and hopefully we'll see more authentic security.
Mark, as you mentioned a few minutes ago, compliance typically drives security more than security really drives compliance. Ideally, security should be driving compliance, but as we've seen, as companies have struggled and rushed to implement GDPR, CCPA, and other compliance legislation coming down the pike, it's still really a compliance game. Do you see this changing anytime soon?
Well, I think one of the important factors is that there's not ever going to be an end to the new number of acronyms that companies have to comply to. So at some stage, there is, I hope, going to be more of a conversation around security driving the compliance requirements and being able to take a risk-based approach. There's only two types of people in the information security world. Those that are proactive and have a roadmap and a plan, and those who don't. And a lot of folks who don't, that is the majority of the organizations out there today, are using compliance as a driver to obtain security because it is a requirement for them. So hopefully organizations start to see that there's very little cost benefit in approaching it that way. There's obviously no reduction in the number of breaches or anything along those lines. So hopefully they start to realize that and understand that they could be more effective if they focused on security and aligned with the compliance requirements.
In your conversations with CISOs and information security professionals and other IT leaders, what's top of mind for them? What are some of the common themes that you see that they're concerned about or trying to build toward?
Well, I think it's funny. So the skills gap is obviously one. Technology and the attacks on technology are evolving faster than people can be trained for those roles. But I also think part of what drives that to be one of the issues is a lack of proper investment in information security and the willingness to train individuals at an organization. The old mantra of a resume for an entry-level position that requires 20 years of experience in cloud technologies it's one of the issues at hand. But I also hear a lot of buzzwords. Obviously, ransomware is a big point of discussion right now, but that is, I would say, a byproduct of improperly securing and monitoring and doing the basic blocking and tackling from a security perspective. Sure. So that's more of a symptom than it is an actual issue. But also budgetary. So the tone from the top, as I'll refer to it, is the executive and the board being involved in cybersecurity and risk-related decisions, allocating funds to something that is not a cost, or that it's a cost center and it's not a revenue center often in an organization.
So there's still a lot of cost justification and ROI perhaps that has to be settled before budgets get approved? Absolutely.
I mean, can you have a true return on investment for something that's a risk mitigation?
It's a ridiculous question in 2020.
It's a hard one to have. It's, I would say, more total cost of ownership of when you buy the technology. It's securing it should be included in that calculation, and it often isn't. So that leaves with budget shortfalls or poor utilization or efficacy of the tools that you purchase, and you end up just coming to RSA the next year and purchasing a new set of tools that you saw here.
So in that vein, a topic we haven't mentioned is cloud. So both for compliance purposes and for security, like cloud still seems to be a really high hurdle for most organizations.
It does, and I think operationally and from a security perspective, there are obviously pluses and minuses to the cloud. From an infrastructure perspective, it is much easier to manage and scale when you're in a cloud environment. And a lot of the cloud environments do operate with some degree of almost a zero trust model of access. Everything is denied unless explicitly added or to an account. But there are a lot of concerns. The cloud is just a set of computers in a data center somewhere else that someone else is managing for you. So it's not perfect for every situation, but it definitely shouldn't be something that turns companies off.
All right. Mark, this is really great insights here, really helpful perspectives on compliance and security. Thanks for joining NewsDesk today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
We've been talking with Marc Punzirudu of ControlScan. This has been Terry Sweeney for Dark Reading News Desk. Thanks for joining us today.